The last family photo. The chilling true story of the Coleman murders. It was supposed to be the perfect family portrait. Bright smiles, a warm living room, and the illusion of happiness frozen in time. But behind those smiles hid a secret so dark it would shatter a small Illinois town and horrify the nation. Within days of that cheerful photo being taken, the family in it would be gone, erased in a single night of unthinkable violence. This is the story of betrayal, obsession, and the destruction of innocence. Stay until the end because the truth behind the last family photo is more disturbing than anyone could imagine. The morning of May 5, 2009, began like any other in the quiet neighborhood of Columbia, Illinois. Birds were waking, sprinklers hissed across perfect lawns, and the first beams of sunlight crept over rooftops. It was the kind of peaceful morning that promised nothing but normalcy. Yet inside one of those tidy suburban homes, the Coleman residence, a nightmare had already unfolded. Christopher Coleman was a man who projected success. A former Marine, he now worked as the head of security for a world-famous televangelist ministry. He had the big house, the beautiful wife, and 2 young sons who adored him. To everyone around him, he embodied the image of stability, disciplined, religious, devoted. But images can lie. That morning at 6:43 a.m., local police received a frantic call from Chris. His voice trembled as he reported that he couldn't reach his wife or children. He said he had been at the gym and had come home to find the house strangely silent. Officers were dispatched immediately. When they entered the Coleman home, what they found silenced even the most seasoned investigators. Sheri Coleman, 31 years old, lay in her bed lifeless. In separate bedrooms, their sons, 11-year-old Garett and 9-year-old Gavin, were also gone, strangled as they slept. Each death was quiet, calculated, and deeply personal. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing stolen. No broken glass, no footprints, no chaos, just the eerie stillness of a family destroyed from within. On the walls, someone had sprayed words in red paint, vulgar, angry messages that looked like the work of a deranged intruder. It should have been the sign of an outsider. But it wasn't. 4 weeks leading up to the murders, Chris Coleman had claimed his family was being threatened. He showed police emails and letters filled with hate, warning that his job with the ministry had made him enemies. The supposed stalker said Chris's work for the church had cost people their faith. Chris told his boss, his neighbors, even friends at the gym. He wanted everyone to know he was being targeted. But detectives are trained to see what doesn't add up, and in the Coleman house nothing did. The messages painted on the walls were written with spray paint purchased at a local hardware store. Security cameras near the store later showed a man matching Chris's build buying the same brand and color. The handwriting in the letters matched his own. The timeline of his so-called gym visit didn't match the physical evidence. Slowly, piece by piece, the perfect image of Chris Coleman began to crumble. Behind the church smiles and family photos there was turmoil. Chris had been living a double life. 4 months, he'd been having an affair with a woman named Tara, a former friend of Sheri's. They exchanged thousands of messages, texts filled with passion, promises, and plans. He told Tara he loved her. He told her they'd be together soon. He even set a date for their new life to begin. There was only one problem. Divorce was not an option. Chris's employer, a strict religious organization, required employees to live by its moral code. Divorce, adultery, or public scandal could cost him everything. His salary, his status, his reputation. And so, as the affair grew deeper, Chris grew desperate. Sheri, meanwhile, began to sense the cracks forming in their marriage. Friends recalled her confiding that Chris had grown distant, cold, almost resentful. He was tired of family life, she said. He felt trapped. Still, she stayed hopeful. She believed they could fix things. After all, they had built a life together, and their boys adored their father. But to Chris, the family had become a burden. To keep his affair secret, he spun a web of lies, including the fake threats. He crafted the illusion of danger to gain sympathy, to create a cover story that would later explain away whatever he planned to do. The night before the murders, Sheri had posted smiling family pictures online, the last photo they would ever take together. The caption read something innocent, something ordinary. No one could have known it would be the final record of their lives. Investigators would later piece together what likely happened that night. Sometime after midnight, while his family slept, Chris moved through the darkened house. First the boys, then Sheri, each silenced by the hands of the man they trusted most. There were no screams heard by neighbors, no signs of struggle, only the faint sound of rain against the windows and the faint smell of fresh paint. When it was over, Chris staged the scene. He painted the angry messages on the walls to make it look like the work of a stalker. Then he left for the gym, creating an alibi. He even called his wife's phone during his drive to prove he was unaware of what had happened. But the phone never rang. When detectives arrived that morning, they noticed Chris's behavior immediately. He seemed nervous but strangely calm. His tears appeared forced, his explanations rehearsed. He was more concerned about his image than the loss of his family. Detectives took note of every detail. Over the next few days, inconsistencies piled up. The emails threatening his family were traced to his own laptop. His phone records revealed that on the morning of the murders, instead of heading straight to the gym, he drove aimlessly, making calls that appeared staged. Surveillance cameras caught him on a route that didn't match his story. The mask was slipping. When confronted, Chris denied everything. He claimed the evidence was wrong, the investigators were mistaken. But the truth was undeniable. The fake threats, the affair, the financial motive, the perfectly staged crime scene, it all pointed back to him. Forensic experts found that the red spray paint on the walls matched paint found on his clothing. Time of death analysis proved the family had been killed hours before Chris claimed to have left the house. The garage surveillance system, which he had supposedly turned off to protect his family from the stalker, had conveniently been disabled that very night. Neighbors who once waved at the Coleman family as they passed the house now stood in disbelief as police tape cordoned off the property. Reporters filled the street, cameras flashing. The once admired church security chief had become the prime suspect in one of the most shocking family murders in the state's history. Sheri's friends were devastated. They recalled her as kind, full of life, and endlessly devoted to her children. The boys were loved by everyone, playful, polite, and inseparable. Their classmates drew pictures and wrote notes, leaving them at the edge of the crime scene. Balloons, flowers, and stuffed animals formed a memorial that grew with each passing day. As the investigation deepened, detectives saw the case for what it was, not a random act of violence but a carefully constructed illusion. Chris Coleman had painted his own family's final chapter, layer by layer, lie by lie, until only tragedy remained. By the time the police led him away in handcuffs, the image of the perfect father was gone. In its place stood a man consumed by greed, pride, and the desperate need to maintain a life built on lies. The final irony? The smiling faces from that last family photo, the one taken just weeks before the murders, became the symbol of everything he destroyed. It was shown in court again and again, a reminder that beneath the smiles, evil can wear even the most ordinary face. The town of Columbia would never be the same. What began as whispers of disbelief grew into outrage, heartbreak, and confusion. How could a man of faith, a man entrusted to protect others, commit the ultimate betrayal against his own family? The answer, as the next chapter reveals, would emerge through the relentless work of investigators and the shocking testimony that exposed every secret he tried to bury. The days following the murders blurred into a storm of grief, disbelief, and suspicion. Columbia, Illinois, was a small town where everyone knew everyone, and the Coleman family had once been admired. But now that admiration had turned to confusion and then to anger. The man who had once guarded the ministry's leader was now being guarded himself, under watchful police eyes. As investigators dug deeper, a pattern began to emerge, a chilling, methodical sequence of actions that told the story Chris Coleman refused to admit. The fake threat emails he had sent to himself were traced to his home computer. The timing of the emails matched perfectly with his daily routine, leaving no room for coincidence. He had written them, sent them, and even followed up with his boss, playing the part of the victim. Every message was another brick in the wall of his deception. Detectives found evidence that he'd been planning his new life for months. He had told his mistress Tara that by the end of May he would be free. He promised her marriage, children, a new start in Florida. He had even begun looking at homes online. But to make that dream possible, he needed to erase the life he had. The police reconstructed his timeline. Chris claimed he left for the gym at 5:43 a.m. But investigators proved that his family had already been dead for at least 2 hours before that. The murders likely occurred in the quiet hours between 3 o'clock and 5 a.m., when the neighborhood was still and no one would hear a sound. He strangled his wife and sons, a form of murder both intimate and deliberate. There was no sign of struggle. The boys were likely asleep when he attacked them. Sheri may have woken briefly, realizing too late what was happening. To investigators, this was not an impulsive act of rage. It was a decision. When confronted with the evidence, Chris remained calm, his expression unreadable. He maintained his innocence, claiming an unknown enemy had framed him. But each new discovery eroded that claim. A strand of Sheri's hair was found on the cord used in the killings. Paint residue matching the graffiti on the walls was discovered on the hem of Chris's shorts. The handwriting on the spray-painted messages matched his own. Even the GPS on his phone betrayed him, showing he never actually went to the gym when he said he did. As the story spread, the nation's media descended on Colombia. The tragedy of the Coleman family dominated headlines. People were horrified not just by the crime, but by the betrayal it represented. A man of faith killing the very people he was supposed to love and protect. Reporters called it a house of secrets, a modern Cain and Abel story, the family photo that lied. Sheri's friends spoke to the press, remembering her as a devoted mother who had suspected something was wrong but couldn't escape in time. One recalled a conversation days before the murders where Sheri admitted she thought her husband was hiding something terrible. She had been right, but she never had the chance to find out how deep the darkness went. By June, the case against Chris Coleman was airtight. He was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. His bail was denied. The community that had once looked up to him turned its back. The ministry he worked for cut ties immediately, denouncing his actions and expressing sorrow for the victims. The trial began in 2011, 2 long years after the murders. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy with tension. Reporters filled every seat. The prosecution described a man driven by pride, greed, and lust. A man who couldn't face losing his reputation, so he destroyed everything that reminded him of the truth. They laid out every detail with precision. The fake emails, the spray paint, the affair, the timeline. The evidence of premeditation was overwhelming. He had not only murdered his family, he had planned it, rehearsed it, and even set the stage to appear innocent. The defense tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, that someone else could have broken in. But the lack of forced entry, the falsified threats, and the digital trail pointing back to Chris left little room for doubt. Jurors watched the last family photo displayed on a large screen. Sheri smiling, the 2 boys beaming beside her, and Chris standing proudly behind them. The image that once symbolized family unity now stood as a monument to deceit. Witnesses were called. Investigators described the crime scene in painstaking detail. Forensic experts testified that the spray paint used on the walls matched the can found in Chris's garage. An FBI analyst confirmed that the threatening emails were sent from his home network. A handwriting expert compared the graffiti to Chris's writing samples. The similarities were undeniable. Then came the most damning revelation. While attending his wife's funeral, Chris had exchanged flirtatious messages with his mistress. To the jury, that single fact spoke louder than any technical evidence ever could. When the time came for closing arguments, the prosecution painted a devastating picture. Chris Coleman had everything. A family, a home, a respected job, yet he wanted more. He wanted freedom without consequence. And when life demanded accountability, he chose destruction instead. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. No plea for mercy. No sign of remorse. Chris Coleman simply sat still, staring forward, as if the reality of his own actions had yet to reach him. Outside, the community wept. Sheri's parents clung to each other, their faces etched with heartbreak. For them, justice was small comfort. They had lost their daughter and their grandchildren in one unimaginable act. No verdict could restore what had been taken. The Coleman house stood empty for years. Some said it was haunted, others avoided driving past it. The walls that once echoed with laughter were silent, and the spray-painted words, later scrubbed away, seemed to linger in memory like a curse. Eventually, the house was demolished, but its story remained carved into the town's collective soul. Even after his conviction, Chris continued to claim innocence. From his prison cell, he gave occasional interviews repeating the same lies he had told before, that someone else had done it, that he was framed, that the real killer was still out there. But no one believed him anymore. The most haunting part of this story isn't just the crime itself, but what it reveals about human nature, how someone can wear the mask of virtue, love, and faith, all while hiding a darkness capable of unimaginable cruelty. Chris Coleman had mastered the performance of a good man. But behind the curtain, he was a man who valued his image more than his family's lives. Years later, people still talk about the last family photo. It circulates online, shared in forums and true crime documentaries, the smiles of Sheri, Garett, and Gavin frozen forever in time. For those who study the photo closely, it serves as both a warning and a heartbreak, proof that evil often hides in plain sight, disguised by familiarity and charm. In the end, Chris Coleman's name became synonymous with betrayal. The ministry that once praised him now refused to speak of him. The community moved on, but the shadow of his crimes never fully left. The case became a symbol of domestic violence, of control, of the deadly consequences of pride. For Sheri's family, the photo remains a bittersweet reminder of love lost too soon. Every detail, the boys' playful grins, Sheri's soft smile, even the angle of the camera, feels like a farewell they never knew they were giving. That image, once meant to preserve a happy memory, became the final record of their lives before it all ended. As time passed, the tragedy of the Coleman murders faded from headlines, replaced by new stories, new crimes. But for those who remember, it still stands as one of the most disturbing family murders in American history, a story of lies, faith, and the dangerous power of image. In that final photograph, the truth was hiding in plain sight. A man smiling for the camera, knowing the darkness that was already forming behind his eyes. A wife trusting him, unaware that her love would soon cost her life. Two children, innocent and unknowing, caught in the crossfire of their father's deception. The picture remains the same, unchanging. The smiles eternal, the tragedy irreversible. The last family photo endures as a haunting reminder that even the brightest images can conceal the darkest truths. The Coleman murders remind us that darkness can live in the most ordinary homes, that trust, once broken, can destroy everything it touches. If stories like this move you, if you believe in uncovering the truth behind the lies, then stay with us. Subscribe for more real true crime stories where we reveal what happens when love turns deadly.